The 9,852nd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted.
Mr. President, member of the Council, 9 days ago, the long-awaited ceasefire in Gaza began. We are heartened by the return of Israeli hostages and imprisoned Palestinians to their families. We are encouraged by marked improvement in the flow of humanitarian aid and in operating conditions. We hope that the ceasefire will hold and then the tremendous suffering in Gaza will subside. UNRWA is the largest UN presence. We hope Palestine. 9 days ago,
Lazzarini, you have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, member of the Council, 9 days ago, the long-awaited ceasefire in Gaza began. We are heartened by the return of Israeli hostages and imprisoned Palestinians to their families. We are encouraged by marked improvement in the flow of humanitarian aid and in operating conditions. We hope that the ceasefire will hold and then the tremendous suffering in Gaza will subside. UNRWA is the largest UN presence in Gaza, with 13,000 personnel and 300 premises. The agency is critical for supporting a shattered population and the ceasefire. And yet, in 2 days, our operation in the occupied Palestinian territory will be crippled as legislation passed by the Israeli Knesset takes effect. At stake is the fate of millions of Palestinians, the ceasefire, and the prospect for a political solution that brings lasting peace and security. Mr. President, in the wake of the ceasefire, we must contend with the devastation of the last 15 months and the enormity of the challenges ahead. A peer-reviewed study of deaths by traumatic injury in Gaza reveals that the mortality figures provided by the Ministry of Health is a minimum estimate. 46,000 deaths is likely an undercount by more than 40%. The study also confirms that the majority of those killed are women, children, and the elderly. Those who escaped death by bombardment, starvation, and disease have emerged shell-shocked. Tens of thousands of people are now returning to the decimated north to search for the living and to bury the dead. Across the Gaza Strip, Palestinians are turning to UNRWA, the agencies they have known all their lives, for support. Curtailing our operation now, outside the political process, and when trust in the international community is so low, will undermine the ceasefire. It will sabotage Gaza's recovery and political transition. Member of the Council, full implementation of the Knesset legislation will be disastrous. In Gaza, undermining UNRWA's operation will compromise the international humanitarian response. It will degrade the capacity of the United Nations just when humanitarian assistance must be scaled up significantly. This will only worsen the already catastrophic living condition of millions of Palestinians. The government of Israel claims that UNRWA services can be transferred to other entities. In fact, the agency's mandate to provide public-like services to an entire population is unique. Our capacity to directly provide primary health care for millions of Palestinians and to resume education for hundreds of thousands of children far exceeds that of any other entity. These services can only be transferred to a functioning state. The government of Israel claims that UNRWA plays a negligible role in providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. In fact, UNRWA constitutes half the emergency response, with all other entities delivering the other half. Since October 2023, we have delivered 2/3 of all food assistance, provided shelter to over 1 million displaced persons, and vaccinated 250,000 of children against polio. Since the ceasefire began, UNRWA has brought in 60% of the food entering Gaza, reaching more than 500,000 people. We conduct some 17,000 medical consultations every day. Less quantifiable, but critical for the humanitarian response and the ceasefire, is the community acceptance. Palestinians know and trust UNRWA. For them, UNRWA is the doctors and nurses providing health care, the aid workers distributing food, and the mechanics and engineers building and repairing wells for clean drinking water. The agency's mere presence brings stability amid profound uncertainty. In the occupied West Bank, where violence is surging, ending UNRWA's operation will deprive Palestinian refugees of education and health care. The Palestinian Authority has made clear that it does not have the financial resource or capacity to compensate for the loss of UNRWA's services. In occupied East Jerusalem, the government of Israel has ordered UNRWA to vacate its premises and cease operations by Thursday. This will affect approximately 70,000 patients and more than 1,000 students. The deputy mayor has called for a public celebration of UNRWA's expulsion from East Jerusalem, opposite the headquarters of our West Bank field office in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It is on this land that local authorities are planning to build illegal settlements. The relentless assault on UNRWA is harming the lives and future of Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory. It is eroding the trust in the international community, jeopardizing prospects for peace and security. Mr. President, the Knesset legislation defies resolution of this Council and the General Assembly. It flouts the ruling of the International Court of Justice. It disregards that UNRWA is a mechanism established by the General Assembly to provide assistance to Palestinian refugees, pending a political answer to the question of Palestine. Implementing the legislations makes a mockery of international law and imposes massive constraints on UNRWA's operation. We are determined, however, to stay and deliver until it is no longer possible to do so. This is not without risk for our Palestinian colleagues, who face an exceptionally hostile operating environment fostered in part by a fierce disinformation campaign. Member of the Council, the government of Israel is investing significant resources to portray the agency as a terrorist organization and our staff as terrorist or terrorist sympathizer. Billboards and ads accusing UNRWA of terrorism recently appeared in major cities around the world. They were paid for by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Google ad campaigns redirect those seeking information about the agency to websites replete with disinformation. The absurdity of anti-UNRWA propaganda does not diminish the threat it poses to our staff, especially those in the occupied West Bank and in Gaza, where 273 of our colleagues have been killed. It sets a precedent for governments to accuse a United Nations entity of terrorism as a pretext to clamp down on human rights. It sets a precedent for criminalizing humanitarian assistance and protection. This year, propaganda efforts spearheaded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry received a boost of $150 million. The political attacks on the agency are motivated by the desire to strip Palestinians of their refugee status, thereby unilaterally changing the long-established parameter for a political solution. The objective is to deny Palestinian refugees the right to self-determination and erase their history and identity. But let me be clear. The right of Palestinian refugees to protection and assistance are not derived from UNRWA's mandate. They exist independently of the agency. And if UNRWA ceases to protect and assist Palestinian refugees, their rights will not only remain, but there will be much greater emphasis on the right to return or to be resettled, for which UNRWA has no mandate. Mr. President, a ceasefire in Gaza must be followed by a political transition that includes an orderly conclusion of UNRWA's mandates and the handover of its public-like services to empowered and prepared Palestinian institutions. This is a path now pursued by the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, led by Saudi Arabia, the European Union, and the League of Arab States. Only a political pathway of this nature can ensure the protection and welfare of Palestinian refugees and peace and security in the region and beyond. A clear choice lies before us. We can allow UNRWA to implode due to the Knesset legislation and the suspension of fundings by key donors. The repercussions of this implosion will not be confined to national borders and will only further destabilize the region. Alternatively, we can allow the agency to progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of a political process. UNRWA was always meant to be temporary. A fair and lasting political solution would allow the agency to hand over its services and workforce to a Palestinian administration. UNRWA has much to offer in support of a political solution. The agency is the largest provider of primary health care in Gaza and the second largest in the West Bank. Our health services and expertise are integral to building a strong national health system. UNRWA has also a pivotal role to play in education. In Gaza today, 650,000 girls and boys are living in the rubble, learning nothing more than how to survive. They have already lost more than 2 years of learning. Absent a full-fledged state, only UNRWA has the capacity to bring these children back to learning. So great is the enthusiasm for resuming learning in Gaza that more than 260,000 children, half of them girls, enrolled in our online learning platform this month. If we fail to resume education in Gaza and to preserve it in the occupied West Bank, we will sacrifice an entire generation of Palestinian children. Member of the Council, the threat posed by political effort to dismantle UNRWA is compounded by financial challenges, with key donors deciding to end or reduce their contribution to the agency. I'm appealing for an urgent increase in financial support to UNRWA, the early disbursement of allocated funds, and a review of funding currently on hold. I also take this opportunity to underscore the agency's long-standing commitment to neutrality. A detailed presentation at UNRWA's Advisory Commission meeting last November made clear that our high-level action plan to implement the recommendation of the Colonna report is on track. We will also continue to take all necessary steps to investigate credible allegations made against the agency and its personnel. Mr. President, Member of the Council, implementing the Knesset legislation will heighten instability and deepen despair in the occupied Palestinian territory at a critical moment. I'm seeking your decisive intervention in support of peace and stability in the occupied Palestinian territory and the broader region. First, push back against the implementation of the Knesset legislation. UNRWA's personnel and services are integral to the success of the ceasefire. Second, insist on a genuine political path forward that delineates UNRWA's role as a provider of education and healthcare. The agency is essential for ensuring a viable political transition. Finally, ensure that the financial crisis does not abruptly end UNRWA's life-saving work. The agency cannot continue to operate in the face of extraordinary challenges without adequate resources. In closing, I would like to share with you a message received from a young person in Gaza last week. It is a stark reminder of the heavy responsibility we bear. Quote, "I'm writing to you from the rubble of a home that once was a place of warmth and life. Now, my days are spent searching for the most basic necessities, like flour to feed my family. What truly breaks me is my helplessness in the face of children. Their innocent eyes seek safety I cannot provide, an answer I do not have. Around us, the elderly sit in silence, their hearts weighed down by decades of loss and suffering. And here I am, dying 1,000 times every day as I think of all that I cannot do for them." Unquote. Unlike the author of this message, we are in a position to do something. It only requires your decisive action and leadership. Thank you.
I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Algeria. Dear colleagues, I extend my deepest gratitude to you, Commissioner General Mr. Philippe Lazzarini and Mr. Jan Egeland, for your briefings. Briefings which underscore once again how vital UNRWA is, not only for the Palestinian people, but for the entire region. Through you, I also thank the entire humanitarian community that continues to give so selflessly in support of the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. These heroes, yes, these heroes risk their lives every day, and tragically, Gaza has become the deadliest conflict for humanitarian workers. It is our duty as the global community to protect them and to create an environment that allows them to continue their life-saving work in safety, in security. Dear colleagues, for over 75 years, UNRWA has been the lifeline for the Palestinian people. From birth to education, healthcare to food assistance, UNRWA has been an integral part of their lives. For generations of Palestinians, UNRWA is not just an agency. It is life itself. This role was especially crucial during the 15 months of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response, and its role remains essential under the ceasefire, as efforts continue to address the urgent needs of the Palestinian people. For Palestinians, for the humanitarian community, and for the international community, UNRWA is irreplaceable. UNRWA is indispensable. Without UNRWA, who would provide the 9,500 daily health consultations that the agency currently offers? Who would provide 1 million people with the critical mental health and psychological support that UNRWA offers. We will provide food to 388,000 families whose survival depends on UNRWA. We will deliver vital water, sanitation, and hygiene services, as UNRWA currently does for around 44% of these services. And we will ensure that 660,000 children, Palestinian children, return to learning in UNRWA schools, which are their only opportunity for education. It is clear, halting UNRWA's operations will be a death sentence for Palestinians, particularly for the most vulnerable among them. Refugees. Dear colleagues, attacks on UNRWA and disinformation campaign against this agency are not new. Since its inception, the agency has been under destructive assault. Why? Because it symbolizes the Palestinian refugee and their right to return, a right that no one can seriously deny. Palestinian refugees, like all refugees around the world, retain this inalienable right. The question of UNRWA's neutrality has been raised time and time again. However, as the Colonna reports confirm, and I quote, UNRWA possesses a more developed approach to neutrality than other similar UN or NGO entities. Despite these irrefutable facts, UNRWA continues to face serious attacks and allegations. Algeria believes that any such allegations should be independently and thoroughly investigated. We must not let false claim undermine UNRWA's crucial role in the life of millions of Palestinians. Dear colleagues, international law is clear. On the one hand, the Israeli occupying power has the responsibility and must ensure human treatment of the Palestinian population and meet all their needs. On the other hand, the Israeli occupying power does not have sovereign rights over the occupying Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. A principle upheld by Article 47 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. In addition, UNRWA, mandated by the UN General Assembly, acts on behalf of the UN members. The collective will of the international community cannot simply be disregarded by any member of the UN, including the occupying power. Furthermore, UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem enjoy immunity under the 1946 Convention. Therefore, the laws recently adopted by the Knesset and order issued that threaten the very existence of UNRWA are a clear violation of international law. We must stand united in opposition to these laws and call for their reversal, as they threaten not only the right of Palestinian refugees, but also the very fabric of international order. Dear colleagues, the very existence of the Palestinian people in their homeland relies on the services provided by UNRWA. To halt its activities will serve the destructive plan aimed at erasing the presence of Palestinians between the river and the sea. Our responsibility is to support UNRWA and ensure that Palestinians are provided with the means to survive on their homeland with dignity, with hope for a better future. To this end, UNRWA must continue its mandate until the establishment of Palestinian state, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini and Secretary General Jan Egeland, for your briefings. The United States is strongly committed to implementing the ceasefire agreement so that the hostages can return home and the people of Gaza can look toward a brighter future under new leadership. We must never forget the lives taken as a result of the brutal Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, and the horrors endured by countless innocent people in the war that followed. Hamas cannot be allowed to play spoiler on behalf of the Palestinians any longer. Not after it started this conflict through its horrific attack and its deplorable behavior. We have seen Hamas cynically weaponize the suffering of Palestinians by using civilian infrastructure, like schools and hospitals, to store caches of weapons, house fighters, and coordinate attacks. We are concerned about reports that returned Israeli hostages were held by Hamas in UN facilities during their prolonged captivity in Gaza. It is vital for a full and independent investigation to assess these very serious allegations. Unfortunately, this follows a pattern of serious allegations on the misuse of UN facilities, particularly UNRWA facilities, by Hamas terrorists. Today's briefing focuses on Israel's laws, set to go into effect on January 30th, that may impact UNRWA activities and prohibit contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. It is Israel's sovereign decision to close UNRWA's offices in Jerusalem on January 30th. The United States supports the implementation of this decision. UNRWA exaggerating the effects of the laws and suggesting that they will force the entire humanitarian response to halt is irresponsible and dangerous. What is needed is a nuanced discussion about how we can ensure that there is no interruption in the delivery of humanitarian aid and essential services. UNRWA is not and never has been the only option for providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Many other agencies have experience and expertise to do this work and have done this work. UNRWA's work has been tainted and its credibility questioned due to the terrorist ties to Hamas that UNRWA staff had that were exposed as a result of Hamas's October 7th attack. Colleagues, now is the time to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those in need throughout Gaza in accordance with the ceasefire deal the United States, Qatar, and Egypt secured. We urge countries to support this effort through additional funding and resources to help quickly scale up and distribute much-needed humanitarian aid. We must ensure Hamas or other terrorist groups are not permitted to seize, divert, or profit from this assistance, and that if it does so, it is reported immediately and held accountable. Gaza must be fully demilitarized to provide a brighter future for the Palestinian people. Hamas should have no role in its governance. The region has suffered for too long from the nefarious influence of Iran and its terrorist proxies, who have exerted undue influence and destabilized the region for decades. As a result of the ceasefire, the countries of the Middle East have an historic opportunity to reshape their region in a way that affords its people a better path forward, where Israel is fully integrated with its neighbors under the banner of the Abraham Accords. The United States will do its part to help create that future. I thank you.
Господин председатель.
President, we'd like to thank the Algerian delegation for convening this briefing on the issue of UNRWA's fate in the context of the ban on its activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, OPT, as a result of the laws adopted by the Knesset. Laws which are supposed to enter into force in the next few days, formally. We're grateful for the candid assessments provided by the Commissioner General, Mr. Filippo Lazzarini, as well as for the briefing by Mr. Jan Jägerland. Colleagues, the Security Council has on many occasions discussed the situation surrounding the steps taken by Israel to ban UNRWA. Members of the Security Council have consistently and unequivocally condemned West Jerusalem's course to break the agency, which, as we all understand, is absolutely irreplaceable for Gazans and the residents of the West Bank. This is confirmed by the latest UN reports, which indicate that a significant portion of the assistance distributed to the population, including assistance which has begun to arrive in the enclave en masse following the deal done between Israel and Hamas, is distributed through UNRWA. What's highly valuable is the agency's experience, its far-reaching system for providing humanitarian assistance, and the agency's infrastructure established over decades. And yet today, almost all Gazans can be categorized as falling into the most vulnerable group category. And UNRWA, as they themselves admit, is practically the only source of support they have left. Nevertheless, despite the foregoing, it's clear that Israel is dead set on stripping UNRWA from the opportunity to carry out its main function and stripping Gazans of the only lifeline they have. And this despite the fact that the allegations leveled by the Israelis about the agency not complying with the principle of neutrality and about the 19 agency staff being involved in the ruthless Hamas attack committed on the 7th of October 2023, these allegations have not been backed up by any convincing evidence. Moreover, no allegations can serve as grounds for banning UNRWA's work, an agency which was established not by Israel, but by a decision taken by the entire international community back in 1949. We've emphasized on many occasions that the Israeli laws not only violate the norms of international law, including the UN Charter, the Fourth Geneva Convention, and relevant General Assembly decisions, but these laws are also at odds with the conditions for Israel joining the UN back in 1949, which include the compliance with and implementation of two flagship UNGA resolutions, 181, the Partition Plan for Palestine, and 194, which refers to Palestinian refugees. Furthermore, Israel's ban on the agency's activities and its revocation of the privileges and immunities of this body are at odds with the purposes and principles of the UN. They are a flagrant violation by West Jerusalem of its international legal obligations, including those stemming from the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. No state has the right to unilaterally deprive UN entities and its personnel of their privileges and immunities. Such an approach makes the very notion of privileges and immunities pointless, a notion that is supposed to ensure international civil servants being able to discharge their duties unfettered. In light of this, the Secretary General should take a more decisive stance, given that a flagrant violation of the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the UN is clear in this instance. A delay in the launch of a dispute settlement procedure only encourages further violations by Israel, which is getting confirmation that it is completely of its full impunity. We deem necessary to consider the UNRWA file, for the ICJ to consider this file as part of the request for a third advisory opinion about Israel's obligations in relation to the diplomatic and UN presence of Israel in the occupied territory. In addition, the ICJ's second advisory opinion of 19th June on the consequences arising from Israel's occupation ruled that Israel does not have the right to sovereignty over any part of the OPT or to exercise any sovereign powers in that territory. The same applies to Israel's ban on UNRWA activities. On top of the tragedy unfolding before our eyes, the agency is confronting the very real threat of physical destruction. In the 15 months of conflict, 270 UNRWA personnel have been killed. This is the highest personnel loss figure in the UN's entire history, a record. Over 200 UNRWA entities have been destroyed. Dozens of its personnel have been arbitrarily detained, and there were reports of them being tortured. We condemn all acts of violence against UN personnel. We abhor attempts to use force to block the agency's work in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Distinguished colleagues, Israel wouldn't dare to issue this challenge to the international community and to violate international law so brazenly if it didn't enjoy and feel such absolute and unconditional military and economic support on the part of the United States. For the entire 15 months of the worsening of the Palestine-Israeli conflict, Washington has supplied Israel with weapons used to kill peaceful civilians. Washington has prevented the passage of any UN Security Council decisions that would have disrupted Israel's implementation of its plans in Gaza. The US is also blocking any attempts to craft collective Security Council measures to defend UNRWA. Thus, it's not an exaggeration to say that the fault for what's happening surrounding the agency falls squarely on the United States' shoulders. Today, we heard this from the representative of the US. It was crystal clear. We'd like to add that according to the US, Israel apparently has the right to shut down UNRWA in Jerusalem. How does this square with international law? The answer is it doesn't. This is an obvious example. This is a clear example of the so-called rules-based international order, which, for the United States, is a replacement for international law. We call on our colleagues in Washington to come to their senses and to exert the necessary pressure on West Jerusalem to avoid further suffering on the part of Palestinian civilians. On our side, we reaffirm our readiness to partake in work on any UN initiatives, including here at the Security Council, initiatives aimed at maintaining UNRWA's presence in the OPT and at ensuring the safety of its personnel. We support the call issued by the Secretary General and the Commissioner General calls on Israel. We demand that Israel upholds its international legal obligations and repeals the aforementioned legislation. It's important to understand that the implementation of these laws banning UNRWA activities will deal a serious blow to the prospects of a ceasefire, which is already fragile, a ceasefire we're all interested in maintaining. In conclusion, we'd like to express Russia's unswerving support as well as support on the part of Russian civil society. Not so long ago, the International Public Fund, the Russian Peace Foundation, nominated UNRWA for the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. We believe this is a timely step which deserves broad-based international support, given the irreplaceable role of UNRWA in Gaza, as well as UNRWA's principled position, for which over 200 UNRWA personnel, which were discharging their duties, paid for with their lives. I thank you.
China reiterates our staunch support for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, and our grave concern at the challenges the agency has been facing recently as a result of man-made circumstances. We call on Israel to stop restricting and crippling the agency and not to go ahead with the implementation of the UNRWA-related legislation. We appeal to the international community to keep up its support for the agency's mandate implementation, as well as the UN, and in particular, the Security Council's urgent actions needed by the agency. I wish to make the following points. First, support for UNRWA is vital to the sanctity of international rule of law and the authority of the multilateral system. Mandated by a GA resolution, UNRWA is vested with privileges and immunities, and as such, should have assured dignity, safety and security and facilities. The way Israel has been holding the agency back and holding it down is inconsistent with its obligations under the UN Charter and international law. It sets a harmful precedent with negative consequences that spread far and wide. Second, support for UNRWA is vital to the survival of millions of people in Gaza. The current ceasefire in Gaza provides an opportunity to ease the humanitarian plight there, and the agreement which came into effect on the 19th of January also contains a commitment to surge humanitarian assistance. More than half of such relief work falls on the shoulders of UNRWA, whose role is indispensable and irreplaceable. Giving UNRWA a hard time flies in the face of its commitment to scale up humanitarian deliveries. Moreover, UNRWA is the one and only education provider to Gaza, and its absence from Gaza's post-conflict reconstruction formula is unthinkable. Third, support for UNRWA is vital to social stability in the West Bank. UNRWA is an important public service provider in the West Bank and an integral part of its socio-economic fabric. If UNRWA stopped functioning as it should, public services such as education and healthcare in the West Bank would come to a screeching halt, and many Palestinians would lose their livelihoods and income, a heavy blow to social stability in the West Bank. Fourth, support for UNRWA is vital to settling the Palestinian question politically. UNRWA never was meant to be a permanent entity, but before national self-determination is achieved for Palestine, before the two-state solution becomes a reality, UNRWA remains indispensable. Any effort to create conditions whereby UNRWA can conclude its mission must be preceded by discussion on how the international community is going to ramp up its effort to breathe new life into the two-state solution and stand up together against any unilateral moves that undermine the said solution, including dangerous attempts to change Gaza's demographics and territory in Gaza and annex West Bank. President, we wish to underscore that the debate over the neutrality of UNRWA is long over. We have the report from the independent review group appointed by the SG, which states in no uncertain terms that UNRWA's neutrality is ensured by a significant number of sound mechanisms and procedures. Any misconduct on the part of a small minority must not be construed as reflective of the behavior of UNRWA as a whole, nor should any action taken vis-à-vis those individuals be used to detract from the humanitarian nature of the entire agency. We hope the countries that point an accusing finger at UNRWA can come up with evidence and share same with UNRWA. Lastly, it would be remiss of me not to repeat that the UN in general and this Council in particular have a duty to take urgent actions to ensure UNRWA can do what it's mandated to do, so as not to subject the Gazan population to yet another wave of collective punishment. China is ready to remain part of the tireless collective effort to alleviate humanitarian suffering, restore peace between Palestine and Israel, and achieve lasting order and stability in the wider region. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. Ahora doy la palabra al...
I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, thank you for organizing this important meeting, and thank Algeria in this regard. Allow me also to thank Commissioner General Lazzarini for his remarkable and continued service, and through him to express our deep appreciation to UNRWA staff who have shown great dedication and courage in trying to preserve life in Gaza at the peril of their own. Allow me further to thank Mr. Jan Egeland for his briefing and the NRC for their role, and through him, thank all humanitarian organizations who have tried to help the Palestinian people in impossible conditions and at great risk. UN staff and humanitarians deserve to be better protected, and we have a duty to hold accountable those who have shown such disregard for the most fundamental rules of our international law-based order, leaving international humanitarian law in tatters and immediate need of reinforcement. Mr. President, Israel has destroyed everything in Gaza. Everything. Except the sacred bond between a people and their land. Their roots run too deep. Their history covers millennia. The wounds of their Nakba have yet to heal. So by hundreds of thousands, they are going back to the north from which they were uprooted and expelled by the occupying power. Yesterday, in 2 hours, Mr. President, 200,000 Palestinians marched walking from the south to the north. Old men and women holding a tired cane, small children who have just recently learned to walk, families carrying whatever they can of what remains of who they are, men and women, exhausted, bereaved, sometimes injured, finding the energy to take one step after another to reverse this latest forcible displacement, survivors of a genocide fighting against ethnic cleansing. They know they are returning to find ruins, that their homes have been destroyed, their neighborhoods have been obliterated, their schools and hospitals have been bombed. They know that all the requirements of life have been deliberately targeted, and yet, still, they went back. That image tells you all you need to know about the Palestinian people. This is who we are. Their tragedy, their pain, and agony, all that they have endured, and the wish of Israel to humiliate them and to make them suffer, even as refugees returning to destroyed refugee camps, not to their villages and towns. But also, this image shows their resilience, their steadfastness, their inability to surrender, and just how much they belong to this land, and this land belongs to them. This is the Palestinian struggle, a simple dream, living in freedom and dignity in their ancestral land. Mr. Palestinians would have to leave. It has often made this miscalculation, and now they're trying again in the refugee camps in Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, Tubas, and East Jerusalem. That by making our people's lives more miserable, more unbearable, more impossible, it will get rid of the Palestinians. And it is again this miscalculation that is behind its attacks against UNRWA. Israel has been attacking UNRWA long before October 7, and at that time it did not try to conceal its objectives. It wanted to end the refugee problem, to erase rights that cannot be erased, that are inalienable. The idea is simple. To get rid of the refugees, you just try and destroy the agencies serving them. If there is no education, no health, no assistance, they will surrender. They will leave. They will abandon the land and their dream of liberation and return. UNRWA makes the lives of our people better, but it is not the reason they have a right of return. And it is not what connects them to the land. And it is not their identity, nor their refusal to relinquish it. If you think that by destroying, displacing, impoverishing communities, you will have peace, you are terribly mistaken. UNRWA was created to alleviate the damage caused by Israel and this prolonged conflict to the lives and rights of Palestinian refugees. First, to offer emergency assistance, and then to offer human development, to restore hope in places of despair, to help people to rebuild their lives, to rebuild communities, to protect and support in times of crisis and upheaval, until a just solution to their plight as required by equity and justice, as enshrined in UN resolutions, including Resolution 194. Mr. President, UNRWA's mandate stems from a decision of the international community as a whole, taken over 7 decades ago and renewed with overwhelming support ever since. This mandate, repeatedly renewed by the General Assembly and overwhelmingly reaffirmed as again on the 11th of December in Resolution ES-10/25, ends once the question of Palestine is resolved in all its aspects in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. If anything, this latest man-made humanitarian catastrophe and unprecedented crisis demonstrate the urgency to implement such a solution. Mr. President, we all refer to UNRWA as the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, forgetting that this was not its core mandate, but rather its response to unforeseen tragic events. UN staff and humanitarians paid a very high price for their attempts to help a people being deliberately targeted and starved and forcibly displaced. Yet UNRWA continues to possess the personnel capacity and infrastructure to carry out the monumental tasks imposed by the emergency situation on the ground. But UNRWA's long-standing role remains to provide education, primary health care, human development opportunities to millions of Palestinian refugees across the region, in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, This is UNRWA's mandate on behalf of the international community. No one other than the General Assembly can unilaterally alter this mandate, imperative for the well-being of millions and for regional stability. There are two organized forces, Mr. President, that can respond to the prevailing disastrous conditions and restore life and hope for the Palestinian people with the support of the international community: the Palestinian government and UNRWA. And yet, Israel is demanding that everyone forsake them and work around them, setting us all up for failure. The consequences and repercussions will be grave. There is no alternative to the Palestinian government, and there is no alternative to UNRWA. Israel that destroyed Gaza and openly aims at getting rid of the Palestinian people does not get to pick and choose who represents the Palestinian people or who represents the UN. It does not get to distort the law and the narrative. It does not get to claim some sort of exceptional status that allows it to commit crimes and enjoy impunity. The problem is not the rules, but their breach. It is not the courts trying to uphold them, but the perpetrators persisting in the commission of crimes. It is not the UN, but rather refusing to do what is necessary to preserve and respect our international law-based order. International law must be upheld. ICJ advisory opinions and provisional measures orders must be respected. Continuing to allow Israel to act as a state above the law is a recipe for only more conflict and disaster. In this regard, we reiterate, Israel has absolutely no sovereignty rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Its presence in our territory is unlawful, and this illegal occupation in its entirety must come to an end. The only sovereign in this territory is the Palestinian people. International law is clear in this regard. The Charter is clear in this regard. The determinations of the ICJ are clear in this regard. The Security Council has also been absolutely clear in this regard. Most recently, in Resolution 2334, the Council must implement its resolutions without exception. Claims that Israel has a sovereignty in occupied East Jerusalem and can act accordingly, including with regard to the status of UNRWA compound, a UN property covered by the 1946 Convention on Privileges and Immunities, contradicts these resolutions, which are binding upon all. Mr. President, the UN member attacking this organization from within its halls, from within this room, openly attempting to destroy a UN agency, killing, maiming, and arresting UN staff, trying to take over, to steal UN premises in occupied East Jerusalem after having destroyed numerous ones in Gaza, this is a very dangerous precedent. If we allow it to pass, then all agencies are in danger. These United Nations are in danger. The entire international community has come to the defense of UNRWA, both at the General Assembly and the Security Council. The international community has affirmed its trust with how the UN respond to allegations and maintained that UNRWA was irreplaceable. For months and years now, Israel has tried to create a rift between the agency and its supporters. We must stand united to defend the agency, the people it serves, and what it stands for. Its role is more needed today than ever. Those who are trying to destroy it need to be defeated in this regard. Mr. President, this is a race against time, for life, for human development, for freedom, for peace. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians headed north, walking north, refusing to wait a single minute, risking their lives yet again. They are the story. They are the story. Hear it loud and clear. They are the story. Their long walk to freedom has lasted way too long. How many more years do you want us to keep walking for freedom? We've been walking for 80 years. It is our right to have freedom. It is our right to have the implementation of our inalienable rights, including our right to self-determination, statehood, and the right of the refugees to return. It is time for them to reach their destination. And we will, and we should reach our destination, and soon to reach freedom, to reach independence, and to live in dignity in our independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. The world owes them that it is your obligation to deliver to us that since you got involved in our case from its inception, then it is your duty to complete this exercise by fulfilling our rights, the rights of the Palestinian people. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in refugee camps in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, also continue to rely on UNRWA for their well-being and protection, which are under direct and escalating threats as Israeli occupying forces and settlers intensify their attacks, causing loss of life and destruction of property and further forced displacement. The international community cannot ignore the rising violence and instability and cannot leave them without protection in this critical moment. We therefore reiterate our standing appeals to the international community to continue their historic accompaniment of our people on this long and painful journey, of which UNRWA has been a central part and must remain so until its mandate is fulfilled with the realization of their rights and the just and peaceful solution we overcome all obstacles to achieve. Millions are depending on us, and we must not fail them. Millions of Palestinian refugees. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. The Presidency of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel.
Esteemed Council members, I hereby inform the United Nations and the Security Council that the legislation concerning UNRWA's activities in Israel will officially come into force in 48 hours, on January 30. In accordance with applicable Israeli law and following the termination of this provisional agreement, UNRWA must cease its operations and evacuate all premises it operates in Jerusalem, including the properties located in Ma'alot Dafna and Kfar Akeb. The legislation forbids UNRWA from operating within the sovereign territory of the State of Israel and forbids any contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. Furthermore, UNRWA will be prohibited from maintaining any representative office, service, or activity within our territory. Israel will terminate all collaboration, communication, and contact with UNRWA or anyone acting on its behalf. Colleagues, this decision reflects years of efforts to address the grave accusations raised against UNRWA. This decision also reflects the reality of the situation, that UNRWA has miserably failed in its mandate, and it has failed the people who were supposed to benefit from its services. This decision was not made lightly, nor was it made quickly. It was not a political decision, it was simply a necessary one. It follows decades of betrayal by an agency that has placed political agendas, neglect, and cover-ups over humanitarian principles. More precisely, this decision was driven by UNRWA's constant refusal to address the widespread infiltration of its ranks by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. It is intolerable for any sovereign state to facilitate the operations of an agency that threatens its national security and blatantly violates its laws. Israel remains committed to its obligations under international law, and we reaffirm our readiness to cooperate with other UN agencies that are untainted by terror and committed to neutrality and accountability. Colleagues, it is time for you to accept, as we have, that UNRWA has failed. It has failed every aspect of its mandate and responsibilities, both morally and professionally. It is now undeniable that UNRWA has been irredeemably infiltrated by Hamas. Over the past several months, I have provided dozens of examples, some stretching back decades, of UNRWA's complicity and its employees' participation in terror. Allow me to remind you of just a few. UNRWA is supposed to play a critical role in the education of Palestinians. It has certainly played a role, but only a toxic one. In both 2017 and 2021, Israel discovered Hamas terror tunnels running directly under 2 UNRWA schools in Gaza. As of 2023, when we entered Gaza, we found out that those tunnels remained operational, despite the letters and the request years prior to that. The principals of these schools, Khaled Said al-Masri and Muhammad Sawida, were confirmed Hamas operatives. Again, this is far from an isolated example. Just last year, Israel provided over 100 names of UNRWA employees who are verified members of Hamas. Unfortunately and predictably, these claims were dismissed without proper investigation. Perhaps most shockingly, on October 7, an UNRWA employee kidnapped Yonatan Samerano, an Israeli civilian. This terrorist returned home to a paycheck signed by you, Mr. Lazzarini. You signed his paycheck. He got paid until we took care of him. And all those countries who supported UNRWA paid this terrorist for years. UNRWA has also misused its platform to indoctrinate hatred. Its curriculum has glorified violence, vilified Israel, and poisoned generations of Palestinian children against any hope of coexistence. These actions are not consistent with an agency claiming to serve humanitarian purposes. They are actions of an organization complicit in preserving cycles of violence. Let's speak about the results professionally. UNRWA has failed to deliver on its core mission. After more than 75 years and tens of billions of dollars, there is so little to show for its work. Where is the Palestinian education system? Before we entered Gaza, where is the economic infrastructure to support self-reliance? Before we entered Gaza, where are the initiatives for refugee resettlement? The answer is clear. They do not exist, because UNRWA has never worked towards these goals. Instead, the agency has focused on its own survival, keeping Palestinians as forever refugees to justify its existence. This focus has all come at the expense of real progress. We heard some reports. I have to tell you that UNRWA's data is far from accurate. And I will share with you the facts. We have the number. In December 2024, of the 5,065 ATRACs that entered Gaza, UNRWA supplied just 33, 0.6%. For food aid, the numbers are similarly insignificant. Of the 3,894 food trucks that entered in that same month, UNRWA provided just 29. That's 1%. Overall, UNRWA has provided just 10% of the aid over the course of the war. In critical sectors like fuel and logistics, UNRWA's role has been sidelined by the World Food Programme and UNOPS. These numbers expose the agency's irrelevance in addressing humanitarian needs. It is not a humanitarian lifeline. It is an administrative relic that has failed to adapt to the challenges it is supposed to solve or deliver meaningful results. Esteemed colleagues, we must acknowledge that UNRWA is a vehicle, not the destination. You are not here to serve UNRWA or the employees of UNRWA. Yet, this Council and the General Assembly have held countless sessions fixated on protecting this broken vehicle, losing sight of the real priority, the people it is meant to serve, the services, the education, the health clinics. It is time to abandon the illusion that propping up a corrupt and compromised agency achieves anything meaningful. Funds and efforts must no longer sustain an organization plagued by dysfunction and infiltrated by terror. The focus must shift to supporting other organizations that are untainted, accountable, and genuinely committed to productive development. Israel is more than ready and willing to work with agencies with proven track records of efficiency and accountability. Agencies have already begun to fill the void left by UNRWA's failures, and with increased support, they can do even more. The international community must make these efforts a priority rather than turning a blind eye to corruption and collaboration with terrorism. The defenders of UNRWA often argue that its termination would create a humanitarian crisis. This is a falsehood. UNRWA's contribution to aid is easily replaceable by capable organizations that are already operational in Gaza. Every dollar spent on UNRWA is a dollar diverted from real solutions. It is time to invest in hope, not in failure. Commissioner Lazzarini himself admitted less than a year ago that UNRWA's activities could be taken on by other agencies. In other words, that UNRWA is essentially replaceable. Colleagues, not only is UNRWA replaceable, but the time to replace it is now. Let me conclude with this. In 48 hours' time, As this legislation comes into effect, we will stand at a turning point. The closure of UNRWA's operations in Israel marks the beginning of a new chapter, one focused on dignity, security, and progress. It is a moment to move beyond the failures of the past and to forge a path toward a better future for all. The international community faces a choice: to continue funding an agency that sows hatred, or to promote a system that nurtures coexistence, to enable terror, or to stand with Israel in its pursuit to accountability and justice. Israel made this decision to protect its citizens and to end the exploitation of international humanitarian aid. But even for those in this room, and I can think about few of you, who do not really care about our security, about our future, but you say that you care about the Palestinian people, it is time to drop your agendas and bias, take a constructive approach for the Palestinian people, and join us in supporting organizations that will actually help those you claim to defend.